class up into small groups that facilitates discussion. But today's an interview day, and I don't think that's going to work, so we'll just have to have one big group discussion. So, how many people had a chance to read the birthmark? How many people had a chance to read Dr. Heidegger's experiment? Okay. Well, at some point you will have to read them. There'll be questions on the test. I'm going to write new questions for the test this year for these stories. So, all right. So let's. Who liked? Let's see. Who liked the birthmark more than Dr. Heidegger's experiment? Who liked Dr. Heidegger's experiment more than the birthmark? Who didn't like either one of them and doesn't know why we're reading them? Right. So let me just take a second then to explain why we do this, and then we can we'll get into the story. There's this field called narrative medicine. Some of you might have heard the term. And there's a number of centers of narrative medicine that have sprung up around the country, and it basically concerns the patients. Patients as narratives, their story as narratives. And really, when patients come to see us, we really are asked to make sense of the story that they're telling us, to try and interpret it in a way that makes medical sense. Okay, but also we want to make sure that we understand the narrative, and just in terms of from their standpoint, from their viewpoint. So there's a few reasons why we read stories in medicine. One is because sometimes those stories they teach lessons just based on their content. They may have something to tell us about the human condition, or about patients, people as patients. But sometimes we also read stories because it helps us to fine-tune those skills that we need to listen to the patient's story, to read between the lines of what they're telling us. There are programs, for example, that send their students, talking about medical schools and the like, that send their students to art museums to develop their skills of observation. So, not everything that you need to be a great PA, or even a minimally decent PA, you learn at PA school. Sometimes it comes from other parts of your experience. So that's why we do this kind of stuff. All right. So, all right. If we have to discuss one of these stories first, and we do, which one do you want to discuss first? Dr. Heidegger's experiment or the birthmark?
The birthmark.
That's the birthmark? All right. So, I really don't, this isn't supposed to be like a lecture, so I'd really like most of the stuff that we talk about today to come from you guys. So, who would like to start off? Maybe you want to talk about the story as a whole, or maybe you want to talk about one particular interaction in the story that caught your attention. And we're looking for anything that this might say to us about the human condition, or about the practice of medicine.
I think in this story it was about perception, because it mentioned about how the birthmark to some people was seen as a blessing, and to others it was seen as a curse.
Okay.
And so some people can have maybe an ailment or something like that and turn it into positive and maybe not need to look for a solution or to fix it, and other people it will really affect their emotional state, mental state, etc.
it also highlighted how the woman's perspective in this story was altered, where she felt it was a blessing at first, but then the environment she was in with her husband, who thought it was a curse, changed her mind.
And if you want to tie that into like some of the stuff that we talked about in ethics, what would you, how would you describe his influence on her?
There is a word, I know you're looking for it, and I can't come up with it. Coercion.
Do you think his effect is coercive? Is his effect coercive?
I would say no. I would say it's more like manipulative, because he's not forcing her into doing it. He's kind of manipulating her into thinking that this is what she should do.
Yeah, I think you could make a strong argument that his effect is, emotionally manipulative. She's a wreck, right? By the end of the story, she's an absolute wreck. Yeah, you could argue that his effect on her was manipulative. What else did you see in the story? Again, one way you might want to think about the story is, did you see anything in the story that made you think about anything that we talked about in the first 5 or 6 sessions, however many they've been? What kind of stuff in the story reminded you of anything that we talked about? So that would be one example, right? The influences that people can have on other people. And of course, Almer was not really a physician. He's not a doctor. He's sort of a mad scientist. But you can sort of analogize his relationship with Georgiana to the doctor-patient relationship, and then we could see all kinds of lessons for us there, right? This is like the patient that goes to the plastic surgeon for, to have like a mole removed, and he says, hey, I can fix your face. Well, there's nothing wrong with my face, but I can fix it anyway. What else?
I have one other thought of things you just brought up. When you look at that relationship between those two as sort of the doctor-patient relationship, even though I know he wasn't a physician, it can show some of the pitfalls of trying to treat someone whom you're so emotionally attached to, i.e. your wife, a family member.
Okay. Maybe, so you're saying some insight into why we don't treat family members, or we shouldn't treat family members. What about, does the story tell you anything, or does it remind you at all about the goals of medicine? You remember we talked about the goals of medicine? Does this say anything to you about the... Yeah.
I'm going to say that by the end of the story, he's so focused on the goal that he loses sight of, basically loses sight of what was great around him. He's so focused on the goal of getting rid of that it becomes the only thing he thinks about. He doesn't think about the detriment or any causes, any later harm, and that's the very last part of the story where he gets rid of it. And she says, "Well, I'm dying." Well, I was explaining. I don't think it wasn't because there was some spirit, and the spirit was attached to the the birthmark or anything like that. That's just whatever poetic writing. It's the fact that he gave her something that was so toxic it would take it away, but at the same time it would kill it.
Yeah, and then going off what George said, we talked about when deciding if you're going to do something, the results are what's going to happen. So the result of her dying was way more worse than actually getting rid of the birthmark. So
Than not getting rid of it.
Yeah,
Than not getting rid of the birthmark. Okay. Yeah.
Would you even, we go back to the goals of medicine and the recollection of the definition of a malady. Did she really meet that? I don't think so.
Yeah, and this goes to what you said to start the class, which was that a lot of these things are, some of these things might be viewed by some people as a blessing, some of them might be, even if we were talking about, let's say we wanted to cut the plastic surgeons some slack and say that, stuff like that is okay, is the remedying of a lesion like this part of the practice of medicine. Even if you want to be generous and say, okay, we'll allow it, generally, it proceeds from the assumption that's the patient that wants it, right? Like, think about like the breast augmentation, okay? If the couple comes in and the woman doesn't want the breast augmentation and the husband wants the breast augmentation, hopefully we all have concerns about being involved in that, right? Right? So, that's one of the things that was going on here. Getting back to what you were referring to about the cost benefit. There's a point in the story where Georgiana says, I don't know what may be the cost to both of us to rid me of this fatal birthmark. Perhaps its removal may cause cureless deformity, or it may be the stain goes as deep as life itself, alluding to the fact that it might be cost her life to get rid of it. Again, do we know that there is a possibility on any terms of unclasping the firm grip of this little hand which was laid upon me before I came into the world? If there be the remotest possibility of it, let the attempt be made at whatever risk. Danger is nothing to me, for life, while this hateful mark makes me the object of your horror and disgust, life is a burden which I would fling down with joy. Either remove this dreadful hand, or take my wretched life. Is this the first time, as you read the story, is this the first time that the husband, Almer, has been involved in this kind of borderline activity, this kind of fringe activity, or is there reference in the story that he's done this before? Anybody remember?
There was reference, but I don't remember specifically. It just had talked about like his previous experiments and.
Yeah, do you remember what kind of stuff he was engaged in the search for?
Is it alchemy?
Huh?
Alchemy, like looking.
That was part of it. That
Make
was
stuff
part of it.
gold, that is it?
It says, at an earlier period, he had studied the wonders of the human frame and attempted to fathom the very process by which nature assimilates all her precious influences to create and foster man. The latter pursuit, however, Almer had long laid aside in unwilling recognition of the truth that our great creative mother is careful to keep her own secrets. She permits us indeed to mar, but seldom to mend, and like a jealous patentee on no account to create life. Now, however, Almer resumed these half-forgotten investigations, not of course with such hopes or wishes as first suggested then, but because they involved physiologic truth and lay in the path of his proposed scheme for the treatment of Georgiana. Again, there's Hawthorne using the word treatment. Again, you could argue, is this treatment or is this... Remember the other day you guys even asked the question about enhancement, the treatment versus enhancement duality. And this story, if nothing else, it implicates that, right? About whether enhancement is an appropriate goal of medicine. Who's Pygmalion? Anybody? Who's Pygmalion? Okay, well, look it up, okay? It's mentioned in, you don't have to look it up now. It's mentioned in the story. So, you know, if you see something in the story and you don't know what it means, you probably should look it up. You don't, I'm not really that well read, so I didn't know who Pygmalion was. I had to look that up. So, and that the same thing. If a patient tells you something, they make an allusion to something that you don't understand. You should ask them what they're referring to. other stuff that, I think that he was involved in before. Remember when he talked with Georgiana about the elixir of life? Remember the elixir of life? Says, and what is this? Asked Georgiana, pointing to a small crystal globe containing a gold-colored liquid. It is so beautiful to the eye that I could imagine it the elixir of life. And he says that in one sense it is. So, of course, Hawthorne could have made the elixir any color. Why did he make it gold? This is
Was it in reference to back to his days of trying
Alchemy?
of alchemy?
maybe you know, you ought to try to tie those two things together. What else?
Gold's a precious metal that many people are.
Gold, right? Its value. What else? Yes. That's a good thought. What else?
It's got a positive connotation, I guess, to be part of it too. I mean, when you get gold, everyone, most people don't think about that gold.
Gold is like a sign of like tantalizing, like everybody wants it.
Can you say it louder?
Gold is like, when I think of gold, I think of something, it's like tantalizing, like you want it.
Okay, it's object of desire. What about, what do you guys think about the interaction between Almer and Georgiana when he finds her in his lab? You guys remember that? What do you think about that?
Asking him about basically looking at some of his files, something more about something really dangerous.
How does he react when he finds her in there? Yeah, he is not happy, right? He's kind of nasty. He says, why do you come hither? Have you no trust in your husband? It is not well done. Go, prying woman, go. Anybody talk to their wife or girlfriend that way?
After a while.
I think he does it because he knows he's caught.
Huh?
He does it because he knows he's caught. You know, the best defense is a good offense. You know what I mean? So he just and then you know he's in the place while he's doing experiments that she may not know about, or she may not know what he's putting in these potions.
And what is she? And when he says that, what does she say? How does she respond? Huh? Yeah, she wants to know. She wants to know what's going to happen, right? She says, "It is not you that have a right to complain. You mistrust your wife. You have concealed the anxiety with which you watch the development of the experiment. Tell me all the risk we run, and fear not that I shall shrink, for my share in it is far less than your own." He refuses again, right? And then she says, "I submit," replied she calmly, "and Almer, I shall quaff," drink, "whatever draught you bring me, but it will be on the same principle that would induce me to take a dose of poison if offered by your hand." Okay? So, what is she doing? If you want to take what she did in the lab and put it in the world of medicine, what is she doing?
Asking for informed consent, or
She's waiving informed consent, right? She's waiving informed consent. She's basically saying, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I want you to tell me anyway, but I'm going to do it. I won't refuse, but so she's waiving informed consent. Okay? And then he says, "My noble wife, I knew not the height and depth of your nature until now, nothing shall be concealed." Well, it's a little bit late now, right? She's already said that she'll do whatever he says.
I'm Siri, your virtual assistant.
What was that? After the story ends, after what happens, do you think that the husband is, do you think that he's sorry? Do you think that he's remorseful? Do you think that if he had the chance to do it again, he'd do it differently?
Very remorseful.
Huh?
He didn't seem very remorseful. He was so proud that he'd done this experiment and had whatever results he had.
So consumed with his goal, I guess.
I kind of thought about the Tuskegee experiment where it was like some people didn't feel guilty about the research they did on the humans because they found the answers to syphilis. And that, you know, some people weren't remorseful about that.
Yeah, well, actually, Tuskegee, they didn't actually learn anything this one.
Yeah, well,
Tuskegee,
like,
but- yeah.
what they were trying to find, they thought that it was justifiable.
One of the questions that some people sometimes ask is, why does Almer wait until after they're married to mention the birthmark? Why didn't he say something on the first date?
Yeah.
Did he have the plan to do the experiment all along?
Right? That would be really manipulative, right? That this was going, this was going on way, way, way back. It's a possibility, right?
Didn't it say it didn't bother him at first? And then it grew?
Is that what the story says, or is that what he said? What does it say?
I don't know which. That's my recollection.
It says, one day he sat gazing at his wife with a trouble in his countenance that grew stronger until he spoke. Does it mention it before that? I don't think so.
It says later on that it says after his marriage, for he thought little or nothing of the matter before Almer discovered that this was the case of himself. About it was taking semblance of a flaw later on.
So let's say that he had been successful in getting rid of the birthmark. Do you think that Almer and Georgiana would have lived happily ever after?
No, he would have found something else.
What's that?
I think he would have found some other flaw to fixate on.
Yeah, you might be right.
That might be part of his personality, kind of.
Well, then she would have felt self-conscious the whole time.
What?
I think she would have felt self-conscious for the remainder of the marriage as well. That something else bothering him.
So even if he didn't find another physical flaw in her, he would have succeeded in creating the belief in her that she was flawed in some fundamental way. What do you think? Why do you think Hawthorne makes the birthmark look like a little hand?
I don't really know if this is gonna sound stupid or not, but I noticed that some people look at it like a blessing.
Okay.
So like a hand, you know, like if you get like the Pope or Jesus like came down and like touched you.
Okay, so it could be like the touch of, it could be a blessing type of touch. What else?
And then the flip side, they refer to it as like a clutching. They had a hold of her.
Hands also clutched, that's right. And there's some sort of talk in the story about how I think it's either it may be said explicitly or it might be implied that gripping or clutching of the hand represented the tie between the spirit and the body. And if you lose that grip, then you see what happens at the end. Other things that hands do besides bless and clutch, they slap. So some people have suggested, well, maybe that was like the slap of the creator, you know. Other thoughts about why it's a hand, why it's red, why it's on the face.
Maybe just calling attention to it. Just calling attention to it, that it's red, that it's on her face, it's something you can't look away from, and I think that it's just, once again, it's just, you know, him using his writing skill and being able to use an image for foreshadowing. So, you know, once he ties it in, say, hey, this might be part of the soul, like you'll immediately start wondering, well, you know, what happens to her if she breaks this?
Interesting question for discussion. If you were going to film the story, who would you cast in the 3 roles and why? All right, so who would you cast?
Who would you cast?
Well, you can't give me 3, give me 1. Remember this, there's the husband, what? Meryl Streep? He's getting up there. A young Meryl Streep. What? Young Meryl Streep, yeah, that makes you good.
Danny DeVito?
Yeah.
Huh? Danny DeVito? That's the lab assistant.
Danny DeVito.
I like that one.
Almer's character could be played by the guy who plays Sheldon on Big Bang Theory.
Jim Parsons.
I never saw the Big Bang Theory.
Oh, he's just
Jim Parsons.
know-it-all science person.
Not that good looking, because he's got this like really beautiful woman otherwise, and he like manifests his unhappiness on this one mark, like she's beautiful otherwise, and he has like all this unhappiness, he just his failures, everything, he just like puts them apart. Whether he's happy or not in the end.
Yeah.
Like, man, he's kind of lost it all.
Or like me. What?
Christopher, yes!
I like to see I know who these people are.
Patrick Swayze and the girl.
Right.
I have to see a picture.
You guys want to take a break and then discuss the second story, or do you want to take discuss the second story and then just break early? Anybody have anything else that they want to say about this story? Again, when you think about it, you're going to say something?
Oh, no. I mean, I had a theory about like the color.
About what?
The color of the birthmark.
Go ahead.
So there's some like cultures that believe that the red color is kind of like an angel's kiss.
Is
So,
what?
An angel's kiss.
Okay.
So like removing the angel's kiss would be like death. So like with the death of the angel.
That's interesting.
So.
That's interesting. So, yeah, I mean, the story, when you sit down and you read these stories closely, and you don't just read through it quickly once, but you read and you ask yourself, you know, why did he say what he said in that way? He could have said that in multiple different ways. That's an important skill to develop, because then you will put it to use when you listen to your patients. Patient can tell you the same story in multiple different ways. So one of the questions is, why did they choose to tell me that way? What is it about what's going on with them that made them say it that way? Okay? Okay, so Dr. Heidegger's experiment is It's an interesting story. Of course, we're told he's a doctor, so this it makes it maybe even more directly related to the practice of medicine. And so he's sitting in his study with his four old friends, and he let's see what it tells us. In the obscurest corner of the room stood a tall, narrow oaken closet with its door ajar, within which doubtfully appeared a skeleton. Between two of the bookcases hung a looking glass, presenting its high and dusty plate within a tarnished gilt frame. Among many wonderful stories related of this mirror, it was stabled that the spirit of all the doctor's deceased patients dwelt within its verge and would stare him in the face whenever he looked thitherward. You get the idea, reading the story, that do you think that Heidegger was a good clinician, a consummate clinician, or do you think he was somewhat of a hack? What did you get reading the story?
No, it's kind of a,
Huh?
it's kind of a kook. He's got both the studs in it, and now he's got the mirror. Could be that, or it could be him always looking at himself, saying, "I want to say something." But other people, his study was kind of described as kind of eerily, dark wood and walls. Kind of odd spot.
Yep.
He's got somebody saying that deep water.
Yeah. It says later on in that paragraph, the skeletal, it was well known to be a book of magic, and once when a chambermaid had lifted it, merely to brush away the dust, the skeleton had rattled in its closet. The picture of the young lady had stepped 1 foot upon the floor, and several ghastly faces had peeped forth from the mirror, while the brazen head of Hippocrates frowned and said, "Forbear." It's kind of interesting. Okay, so that's his study, and he tells him that he has this water that he wants them to taste. He says the famous Fountain of Youth, if I am rightly informed, is situated in the southern part of the Floridian Peninsula, not far from Lake Macaco. Anybody know where Lake Macaco is? Lake Macaco is Lake Okeechobee. So he wants them to taste this. He wants them to taste this water or what? But he wants them to taste this beverage. And if you want to think about the goals of medicine, okay? You want to think about the story from the vantage point of the goals of medicine. What goal is Hawthorne talking about? Whether it's a legitimate goal or not, but it's medicine seeking to do what? Yeah.
More like experimental observation.
Say it again?
More seems to me like an experimental observation.
Yeah, I mean it is sort of a research experiment, and so we can think of this story from the standpoint of research ethics, but they tell us at the end of the story that they're going to go to Lake Okeechobee and they're going to drink morning, noon, and night. If they do that, what goal are they searching for? Go ahead.
Could this also be an issue of enhancement versus treatment?
Yeah, and a specific type of enhancement, right? What kind of enhancement? Yeah. Remember when we talked about the goals of medicine? Do you remember what the 4 goals of medicine were that were the consensus of the Hastings Center report? Huh?
Preserve life and treat malady, I think.
Okay, so prevention of premature death, prevention of disease, the cure a disease or care of the patient that can't be cured, and treatment of pain and suffering caused by disease or maladies. So the particular type of enhancement that they're looking for here is what? It is related to which of those? Well, suppose there was a fountain of youth. There was such a thing. And you could drink it, and you could become young again and stay young. What would the goal be of drinking it? Yeah, it would be anti-aging. It would be to stop the aging process or to reverse the aging process. And assuming it was possible, prevention of not just premature death, but any death, right? So one of the questions that the story raises and makes us think about is whether that's a legitimate goal of medicine. And this is actually a good time, the last 5-10 years, to be thinking about that, because there's this sort of whole industry that's sprung up, you know, anti-aging medicine. You ever see that in print publications or TV publications? The doctor that's like 60 years old or 70 years old, and he looks like a bodybuilder, and he's got blue jeans and no shirt on. He's like this, and he goes, I can beat the crap out of my 2 sons, and and all these people that are using human growth hormone and all these kinds of interventions to arrest and reverse the aging process. So one of the things that the story should make you think about is whether the pursuit of youth and anti-aging, whether that's a legitimate medical goal, whether medicine, if it were possible to do it, whether we should do it.
The main thing that I got out of the story was they are doing, like, at one point in the story, the doctor asks or tells them that before they take it, they should write down things that, like, so they wouldn't make the same mistakes that they made. So, and then none of them decided to do that. So I thought that was, like, the main part. Like, if you don't write things down, like, they didn't get relief from their pain and suffering because they chose not to write things down and learn from their mistakes. But had they done that and wrote down like literally all of their mistakes and then done the peer review, they probably would have had a reduction in pain and suffering, and they could have done good things with their lives instead because they chose not to learn from their mistakes. So it could be, it's not necessarily, in my opinion, it's not that like anti-aging medicine is bad. It's bad if you keep doing the same things that you're doing. But like if you could take all of your knowledge and you combine it, and like you could do a lot of stuff. I mean, like, you could accomplish crazy, like, you have the same knowledge, a younger body, and then you have longer to live. Like, so.
Yeah, that's everybody's fantasy, right? Is to be 4 years old again and go through all of that stuff all over again. What's an interesting question though is you mentioned about writing the stuff down. So when they grew younger, and it didn't last long, right? You get the impression it just lasted a few minutes or something. But when they grew younger, do you think? And I don't remember if the story says anything about that. Do you think, though, that they brought their memories with them? Or when they grew younger, did those memories disappear? And were they incapable of learning from their earlier mistakes?
I think the character, I think they had character flaws. I think those people were inherently bad people for whatever their reasons that they were bad, before, whether it was a politician or a womanizer or whatever, obsessed with her looks. They were all who they were, and going back and being younger wasn't going to change that. Your age isn't going to change that, whoever you are.
Okay.
I think it shows that when they looked upon themselves in the mirror, they were still old, correct? So I don't think it changed. I think that was just showing that, hey, you are who you are, and I don't like you to tell you you're wrong or whatever. Unless you yourself decide to change. So
Yeah.
In regards to your question, I may be mistaken, but I think in the story, since they keep their memories with them, the female
I don't remember that. Is that what happened?
Yeah. They still kept their memory, they're like, oh, like, she's looking for all her wrinkles and stuff, and then she didn't.
Okay, so you think there's evidence in the story that they do bring their memories with
Because
them?
when they were fighting, she was brought up that, yeah, he said, like, each of the three of them said, well, I should have her because of this from back then, I should have her because of this from back then.
So if that's the case, if that, to the extent that that's true, then was it really important that they wrote anything down?
Maybe just like keep their goals in mind. Like if you see it, like out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. If they see that this is what I did, I should do this again.
Okay.
They might have a learning curve instead of just doing everything all over again.
Okay.
I agree with what George said, they're kind of just bad people in the start, they were miserable in old age, you could repeat that a bunch of times, and even if they had listened to the doctor or written things down, like, they were so intoxicated with what was going on, they wouldn't have paid attention at all. They're just a bunch of horny little idiots that start fighting over the girls. I just think that's kind of people who were, that wasn't an issue.
I think we're assuming that this really was something that made them younger, but I kind of got the impression that maybe it was all in the head. Like maybe it was champagne, they were just kind of drunk, and like in the mirror they still looked old, they still, I wasn't really convinced that they really had become younger.
But they saw the flower. How about the butterfly too? But they also saw the flower
Yeah,
before
but
they drank it.
but it also mentioned that they had seen, this was a simple feat of magic that they'd, kind of thing they'd seen before. Could have been a sleight of hand kind of thing.
Yeah, dude, they
I don't
think
know.
they lose, they make an illusion the whole time.
Yeah. And then as soon as they saw that water go away, as soon as they saw their, dreams shattered, they became old again. I don't know. Tap into it, I guess.
I thought the doctor made reference to it being a benefit of society. He was saying if you're like before you drink this, I ask that you would take what you know and help the younger generation. So his intent didn't seem to be like, I'm just gonna give you what you want, you can have your youth back and be idiots. He was trying to make it beneficial.
And I think you're trying to start with the worst people and see if they would actually do it.
So
If there's the most higher.
It seems like if his intentions were so good, he wouldn't have chosen that group of
Yeah,
people
that's
to
true.
give it to. I don't know.
they had more to learn from.
I guess so.
They had more examples of what not to do.
You want to give them a second chance?
Is aging a malady? You guys have the definition of malady in the notes. Tell me if aging is a malady.
Well, I was going for the fact that when you're 15 years old or 18 years old, they easy to know with disease and have people who know who lost cancer. Any of that. And when you get older, even in my 20s, I hadn't lost anybody. It wasn't until like this year that I lost somebody from other diseases.
Okay.
So I think with age, yes, becomes, they say if you get through your 30s without having anything major, most likely you're not going to have these major, diseases. That's kind of the long term. So I think age, when you're following the timeline, yes, the older you get, the more people get whichever disease you're talking about. Yes.
So, but if it's a malady, what's the problem with saying that aging is a malady? It's sort of like asking whether pregnancy is a malady, right? It happens to everyone. So if something happens to everyone, can it be a malady?
Isn't it like the timeline if men, if we all growing up old enough to be 100, we'll all get prostate cancer?
Okay? But then some people could argue, okay, but if you do, then the malady is prostate cancer, not being 100. Some people could argue that, right? Yeah.
The malady is an increased risk of suffering, though. Increased risk of disease. That may be predisposed to more.
Yeah, read it out loud.
Person has a malady, if he has a condition other than rational beliefs and desires such that he is suffering or increased risk of suffering in harm or evil. In the absence of a distinct sustained.
The distinct sustaining cause. And if you apply it you apply it strictly, it sounds like it might be, but it's sort of counterintuitive, right? To think that apply the definition also to pregnancy, and you could make the argument that pregnancy is a malady as well, right? And then you have to say that, okay, the way that we propagate the species is by contracting a malady. That seems kind of counterintuitive. But it is interesting to think about this stuff. Another thing that's interesting about since you guys brought up the issue of memory. Did anybody ever read well, maybe we'll talk more about this in one of the ethics classes too. Did anybody study psychology in college? Okay, anybody ever read anything by Daniel Kahneman? Have you read anything about the difference between the remembering self and the experiencing self? Do you remember that? So they did these experiments which were fascinating. They had people put their hands into a solution of cold water, which was painful, and they had to keep their hand there for 60 seconds. And then after 60 seconds, they said you can take it out, and they hand them a warm towel to put on their hand. And then they asked them to do another experiment, and they had them put their hand into the cold water at the same temperature for 60 seconds, but for 90 seconds. But over the last 30 seconds, they bled warm water into the tank. But it was so gradual and so minimal that it did not, they wouldn't realize what was being done, okay? But it was enough to lower the temperature, to raise the temperature of the water 1 degree, and so it made it less painful. So 90 seconds, okay, but the first 60 seconds is the same. The last 30 seconds are still painful, but less painful, okay? And then they asked people, without telling them what was going on, they didn't tell them what was going on. They said, okay, one of them was done with the left hand, one of them was done with the right hand. And they said, which one would you be willing to submit, would you be more likely to submit to again? Okay? Now, if you ask somebody the question, and you have a chance to think about it, what do you think they would say? Huh? Which one is the one that's going to be less painful? Huh?
The 90 seconds.
No, the 60 seconds. Because they're both being subjected to 60 seconds of water at whatever it was, 14 degrees, okay? But then the last 30 seconds was water at 15 degrees, okay? So it's painful for 90 seconds or it's painful for 30 seconds, at 60 seconds. The only difference is that in the second one, with the 90 seconds, the pain is less for the last 30 seconds than it is for the first 60 seconds. That's what you do. So if you ask somebody to reason it out, what they tell you is, well, I'll take the 60 seconds, not the 90 seconds. But that's not what people do. People almost, without exception, pick the 90 seconds instead of the 60 seconds, which is more pain. Okay, and if you count the pain as the severity of the pain and the duration of the pain, it's more pain for 90 seconds than it is for 60 seconds. And what they figured out from these studies was that our memories are flawed, and what we remember about an event or an entity is the peak moment and the end. So the peak and the end, peak intensity of the pain or the pleasure, and what it was at the end. And basically, they add those two together and they come up with an average, and that's what they remember about the episode. Okay? So if the peak of pain of the 60-second and the 90-second was the same, the peak was the same, the pain, at the end, the pain was less in the 90-second, right? It was less, so they're gonna prefer that one. What they found out is that the duration means nothing when formulating our memories. So that it has implications for informed consent. It has implications for how good we are at being able to predict or protect our future interests. Okay. Something else I want to tell you about that. They also did the study involving colonoscopies. Okay. Now they give you midazolam and they give you Demerol, and so you go to sleep during the colonoscopy and you don't remember what you had. The last thing you remember is they put the thing in your arm and then that's it. You wake up and you don't remember anything about it. In the old days, they didn't give you anything. They just did the colonoscopy, and so it was uncomfortable, as you might imagine. And what they found out was that when they would ask people, they could ask two questions. Okay, they're doing the colonoscopy to a person, and they could ask them, how do you feel right now? Terrible. How do you feel right now? Terrible. How do you feel right now? Worse. And they would keep a running flow chart of how the person felt. All right? So they'd have a graph during the colonoscopy. Okay? And that's called the experiencing self. Okay? Then what they did is after the colonoscopy was over, they would ask the patient, okay, so, how bad was that? Okay, and what they found was that when people were going to rate the suffering associated with their colonoscopy, what mattered was not how long it took. Didn't matter how long it took. This is the same thing they found in the cold hands experiment. What mattered was what was the peak. When you ask them, how bad is this on a scale of 1 to 10? This is 10. Okay, they would remember the peak, and they would remember how bad it was at the end, right before the scope came out. Okay. And so one of the interesting questions that it raised, it's not an issue anymore because now we put people to sleep, but one of the interesting questions it raised was, well, if people suffer more, if it's painful at the end, then should we prolong a colonoscopy so that, in other words, keep the scope in there even though we're not doing anything, just so that at the end it's not painful. We prolong the procedure just to make sure that at the end there's no pain associated with the end of the procedure. Right? It doesn't do the experiencing patient any good. In fact, there might be some discomfort associated with still having the scope in. But they said the remembering patient in the future is going to suffer less if you leave it. Doesn't that create an interesting discussion? Who do we owe the duty to, the experiencing patient or the remembering patient? Okay, well, I think there's two more of these humanities sessions. This wasn't, maybe you didn't love these stories. Wasn't a particularly high energy session, I can tell. Because it's right after lunch. It would also be nice if we had more faculty involved, and we will in subsequent humanities sessions. But keep this in mind. Okay, I don't know if any of you are inclined to do this kind of thing or not, but if anybody likes creative type writing and literature stuff like this, one way to satisfy the grad project is to do something, either creative writing or some type of a commentary or something like that, that would find its way into a journal that's going to get published. So as long as it's got some type of relation to medicine, the practice of medicine, or being a PA, it's something to keep in mind. Right? So any questions? Any questions about do you have a class at 3 o'clock? You guys looked out. Okay. Any questions about anything that we talked about today? I remember I'm writing new questions for the test this year, so I'm not gonna ask you where Lake Macaco is, that was probably on the last test. So, all right, I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks.